One.
Hi guys, good morning. Is it still morning? Yeah, it's still morning. Thanks for joining us for our first ever beginning watercolor tutorial. So we're going to be starting off by talking a little bit about supplies. This is geared towards everybody who hasn't taken watercolor before, but if you guys have taken watercolor before, this is still going to be useful because maybe you're trying out different supplies and or the practice is always good. So let's talk about supplies. So we talked about the supplies briefly, and that we're using today is the Crayola watercolor palette. It is not my preferred palette. However, you guys talking about practicing, I practiced quite a few little projects using these paints and it worked quite well. So if this is what you have today, which is what I have, these work great. Now there is a couple like off-brand palettes that are not Crayola. They were not quite as well. So if you have the off-brand, it will still work, but you may find that it behaves differently than this one. So every paint behaves a little differently, and that's part of what you need to practice. Whenever you guys have new paints ever, doesn't matter how long you've been painting, you need to practice with your paints because they do not all act the same, okay? Now, so that's the palette I'm gonna be using today. Talk about paints really briefly. There is different kinds of paints, different kinds of brands. So obviously the Crayola comes in a palette. They're already in little, what they call pans. So the pan is these little pockets, right? That's why they're called pans. Watercolors come most typically are in tubes, kind of like this. So if you guys have a tube of watercolor and you want to paint with us today, you can. So you'll just take a little bit of your paint onto a clear painting surface. You can either use like a hard piece of plastic like this, or I think Gia was saying, you know how the paper plates that are, they have like that, they're slick. They're not the rough paper type. They're the slick kind of paper. Yeah, Joey, just like your palette has the paint in it. You would just put a little daub of paint onto your palette like that, and you would just be painting straight from this. So it doesn't really matter if you guys have a tube of paint versus the pan paint. Both will work just fine, okay? Now, brand-wise, one that I've been using a lot in my classes, and if you guys have taken classes, you've seen me use this. This is the Reeves paint. You can get this at Michael's. You can get it on Amazon. Michael's is still doing curbside pickup. So between Michael's and Amazon, this is a pretty good paint for beginners. It is, I think, quite a bit better than this pan Crayola paint, but still very affordable. So that's a really good paint. A step up from that is the Winsor Newton Cotman. I think it all depends on how long you've been painting. If you guys are just starting and you're just practicing for fun, just stay with the Crayolas. They'll work just fine. If you want a little bit better, go up to the Reeves. And then if you want a little better still, you can use the Winsor Newton Cotman, which you can also get on Amazon and Michael's. Okay. Now, brushes. You're going to need to grab some brushes. So the Crayola kit came with a brush kind of like this. They're not super great, but if this is all you have, you can use the paintbrush that comes with the kit. It's lacking. It's not going to hold very much paint, but if this is what you got, please use it. The brushes that I tend to use by brand, at Michael's, they have a brand called Grombacher. I like this brush. I think it works pretty well. Not terribly expensive. I would get it with a coupon though if you're going to get it. The other brand, I think they do carry it at Michael's as well. Ignore the fact that it's a fan. It's just the brand I'm looking at. Princeton, it's with the blue handle. I actually really like these. And if you have been taking classes with me, I use this brand a lot with my students. They're really affordable and they work pretty darn good considering the price point. So I really like these. And then for some of my more advanced students, I've begun talking to you guys about the brand that I use. This is the brand that my teacher used, Golden Fleece brushes. And this is the one I will be personally using today. This brush, it's a little more expensive, so don't worry about it if watercolor is something you're just trying out for fun. This is just for if you want to be going further with your watercolors. This I get, though, from Cheap Joe's online. Okay, so now we'll talk about our setup. You're going to need some water. So if you're just joining us today, I have a thing of water. I'm going to put that on my dominant side. So if you guys have never taken watercolor with me before, you're going to put your palette of paint, so this guy, and your water on your dominant side. So if you're a righty, go ahead and put it on your right. If you're a lefty, go ahead and put it on your left. So start with that. And you're also going to need a piece of paper towel or old rag or something. That's also going to go on the right side. So that's off camera. You can't see that real well, but it's over there. Okay, so we're gonna start by working on little boxes to work on washes and different techniques that you can do with watercolor. Now we're gonna have to start off by drawing them. So if you guys have a ruler, you can go ahead and use a ruler and draw them out, or you can freehand them, but I want you to draw with me 4 rectangles on a piece of paper. Oh, that reminds me, let's talk about watercolor paper. Just like paint and brushes and everything else, there is a plethora of papers out there, you guys. So the one I'm using today is this one. This is Canson watercolor paper. All of this you can find at Michael's and on Amazon. This is very affordable. It's a pretty decent paper, especially for beginners. So if this paper works really well, this is what I'm using today. Another paper, again, you can find this at Michael's. It's a weird shape, but here's the brand. This is Strathmore, and Strathmore actually has several different varieties of watercolor paper. I think I saw Miss Gia using the yellow pad. There's different kinds. I think the yellow pad, out of all their papers, is probably my least favorite, but it works. This one with the thistle is my favorite of Strathmore. And then lastly, also by Strathmore is the watercolor paper, and it has the little windmill picture on it. This one I also really like. So any of those watercolor papers will work just fine. Honestly, just get watercolor paper. It doesn't really matter the brand. They all act different though. So as you're going along and you're painting, you will want to try different papers because they all behave a little differently. Okay, anyway, so back to my paper. I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw some rectangles. I'm going to freehand mine, but if you guys want to draw them with a ruler, go ahead and do that. So that is step 1. As we go along, you guys, make sure you're asking questions if you're confused. Though most of you have probably taken watercolor with me before, so this should not seem scary or new because you've already done this before. But I like to use the example a lot with my students. If anybody here has ever taken music or sports, anything like that, how many of you guys have ever just tried one song or played, maybe you swung the bat once and then you called it good, you never did it again? I'm sure most of us have tried it more than once. I kind of use that with my art as well. The techniques that you learn in art, doesn't really matter what it is, painting, drawing, digital art, you practice principles of the technique and you practice it again and again and again and again. So same thing for me. So at this point, you guys, as a teacher, I have done this exercise, I cannot even tell you how many times because I've taught it so many times. So I've been practicing this one technique over and over and over and over. It's really good practice for me. And every time I do it, I try to challenge myself to make it better than the last time. Maybe the wash needs to be smoother this time. I need to blend the colors better this time. So every time you do it, try to find something that you're going to try to do better than you did the last time. So always try to make a little challenge for yourself. Okay, so I've made my little boxes. See if they're in there okay. Yeah, okay. So I've made my little boxes up here and we're gonna work on different kinds of washes. So this first one will be my dry wash. So a dry wash means that the paper stays dry and we're gonna paint directly onto the paper. So let's talk about how to make your puddle of water though. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna take my brush and I'm gonna dip into the water. I'm gonna grab a color. It does not matter which color you grab. I'm gonna grab green. And because these are dry, these are the pan palettes, they're dry, I have to swirl it in there to rehydrate the color. And then I'm gonna take it over into my clear plastic palette. I'm just using the top as a palette and I'm making a puddle. Now I'm gonna tell you right now, because these Crayola paints are not very pigmented, I grab a lot of color. There we go. So that's about good. So it's very wet. Do you see how it's moving really well? That means I have enough water in it. So now I'm gonna take this loaded brush and I'm gonna work side to side. Do not outline the box. I see a lot of students outline the box first. If you do that, the perimeter can begin to dry before the inside, and then you get this weird line. So you guys saw that I just did about 2 to 3 passes before I went and grabbed more paint. About 2 to 3 passes, grab more paint. I'm just going side to side. If you don't have enough paint on your palette, you can always mix up a tiny bit more as you go. It's been a nice challenge for me, you guys, practicing with different paint that I've never worked with before. I have never used Crayola paints. I think last time I used them was probably when I was, you know, tiny munchkin. Okay, so I think that that is done. So I am now taking my brush and I am cleaning it off in my container of water, and I am taking my brush onto my paper towel and I'm just dabbing off the excess water. And you can't see that off camera. Okay, so the next box. So what we're trying to do, you guys, is work on a couple of the most common watercolor techniques. They are by no means all of them. They're just some of the most common ones. So we just did the dry wash. The one over here is going to be a wet wash. So we just did a dry wash. So anyone can probably guess what this guy is going to be. This is going to be wetted first. So what you're going to do is you're actually going to take your brush and you're going to very lightly dampen the paper. I say lightly because you don't want puddles of standing water. If you have puddles of standing water, it's too much. But I'm just going to take my brush, it's lightly dampened, and I'm just going to wet the box. And I'm going to grab a different color this time, you guys. You may use the same color or a different color. So there are reasons and situations to use a wet technique versus a dry technique. Some of my previous students, do you remember what the differences might be? Yes, I have a yes, Joey. What do you think, Joey?
Well, wet spreads the color more, so do a little less, and dry keeps it a little more separated.
Yes, so it's about control. Very good, Joey. So one of the things that's nice about wetting a surface versus not wetting a surface is, like Joey said, it's primarily it's control. If you were doing a tight, clean area and you wanted things to not bleed into each other, you wouldn't wet the surface. If I was doing like a background to something, I would wet the surface first, because the other reason wetting your surface is helpful is it slows drying time. So a lot of times when watercolor artists are painting for the first time and they're frustrated because they're getting all these weird streaky lines, it's because your paper has dried. So one of the things that can be helpful is wetting the surface first before you begin painting. It will slow the drying time for your paint. Okay, you guys keeping up okay? Let's see, I gotta see everybody. I can't see everybody. Okay, looks like everyone's doing okay. All right. So we're moving on to the third box. So the third box, I like this one. I think this is the one you should be practicing over and over and over. This is our wet into wet. So it kind of looks like this guy over here. So what you're going to be doing here is you're going to start off exactly the same as your wet wash. So you're going to wet the box first lightly, and you're going to be mixing in 2 colors into our box. So I'm going to wet my surface. The goal of this exercise, you guys, is to have the 2 colors bleed into each other very softly. So there should be no hard line. This one I probably use the most in my painting, because when I'm painting large areas, I might have like a beautiful sunset, or maybe there's a huge background I have to paint and there's washes of blue and purple and green, but they all are really, really soft. Well, then I will use this technique to have them all bleed into each other very softly. So I'm going to take a totally different color this time. I'm going to take purple, and I'm just going to kind of push this around very sporadically. Now, when I've done this this exercise with my students, I'll actually have you guys try it 2 times. I want you to try it once, more loose and organic, like I'm doing right here. And then I want you to try once, maybe cutting it down the middle, either diagonal or vertical. And try making there be a line, but it not being hard. And maybe I'll show that to you guys in just a second. So I'm just popping the yellow, and I'm washing my brush out, you guys, every time in between, because as I get in close to the purple, I'm picking it up, and I don't want to make my yellow dirty. So I'm washing my brush out each time I'm grabbing the yellow fresh. Okay. So it's going to be drying nice and softly there. I have to say, you guys, not having used Crayola, I'm not mad at them. They're pretty good. Now, the last box, I'm going to have you guys either do it 2 different ways. So this was my fault. I didn't tell Miss Gia that we were going to be trying salt today. Part of the reason I didn't tell her we're doing salt today is because you're not going to be able to see it finished during class time because it takes so long to dry. But something I would like you to try, maybe after class is over today, is I want you to grab some salt and try this wet into wet technique by sprinkling some salt over the top. So I'm going to show you how to do it here, but you're going to have to do this probably after class is over today. So when you grab salt, maybe ask your mom if she has kosher salt. Kosher salt is the best. It's kind of thicker, more grainy. If she has kosher salt, that is preferred. If you have just regular salt, it will work as well. It just won't work quite the same. So see what she has and ask her if you can have a little bit. But I'm going to show you how to do it. So I'm going to do my wet into wet again. And I'm going to try doing it cut down the middle, cut like diagonally. So this is your chance to try it again. I'm just going to be adding in a little bit of salt. Now, the reason I'm having you guys practice all these different techniques is the wet into wet primarily is the technique that we'll be practicing when we paint our tree later. And so if you've never practiced watercolor before, I need you to be able to practice this a few times before we do our tree later. Let's see, I'm going to grab some yellow. Something I noticed about the Crayola paints, the yellow and the orange are really close to the same color. Like the orange and Crayola, they look like some of my yellows in my palette. I thought that was very interesting. It is not terribly pigmented. Also, some colors show up better with the salt technique. The lighter the color, it's a little bit harder to see the salt technique. So maybe choose a darker pigment like purple or blue. Okay, so there is mine cut down diagonally. And then while it is wet, you guys, so if you do this as well, you do it while it's wet. I'm gonna grab a little bit of salt and I'm just gonna sprinkle it on. Can you kind of see how it's pushing away the color, you guys? Can you see that? It's pushing away the color. See that? Actually, technically, I think it's like absorbing it, but so it's a really interesting technique to do. So if you have salt, that's what I want you to practice later. Good. How's everyone doing? Good. And everyone's muted. Good. I'm seeing lots of yays. Thumbs ups. Good. Thumbs up. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So since we have a little bit more time, I'm going to actually have us practice maybe like one more thing together. So I'm going to set this aside since I'm done with this. I'm going to grab my paper again. Okay. I am going to try doing like a little mini gradation sort of exercise. If you guys want to try that with me, I'm going to make a very long rectangle. I may or may not use the whole rectangle. We'll see. Okay. So this was my thought. I want us to practice. This is going to be a little bit wet onto wet exercise. What I'm going to try to do is make a very long sunset. So the colors I want us to use are purple, red, orange, and yellow. Okay, so that's going to be the colors. So if you need to, you can get them hydrated and ready to go. And I actually have to wipe my palette off because I have green on my palette. And this will be the last thing that we practice until we come back later and we start our tree. Gianna, how are you doing, honey?
I'm doing good.
Doing good? Okay. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I'm actually getting my colors ready. So if you guys have been doing this with me before, you know the drill. If not, here's what I'm gonna do. I am hydrating my colors and I'm taking them over to my palette and I'm making little puddles. So I'm preparing myself. It's usually better to be all ready to go because when you have to wait to mix up your colors as your paper is wetted and ready to go, your paper is drying as you are getting your colors ready. So it's better to be all ready to go first. So I have my purple, and I've got my red. Let's see what I say, orange. And some yellow. Now, as I go along, I might have to grab more paint, and that does happen, but at least I'm mostly ready. Looks like I'm needing a little more red. Okay, so my colors are ready, you guys. So you're going to start by wetting the whole rectangle with just water. Step one. Now, if you're new to watercolor, when you guys grab new colors as we go down this rectangle, you're going to have to wash your brush out before you grab the next color. So you can't see it because it's off camera, but I'm washing my brush out quite frequently when I'm grabbing new colors. Okay, my whole thing is wet. So I'm going to start with purple at the very top. Let me write them down real quick so you guys can see. It's purple first, then it's going to be red, then it's going to be orange, and then it's going to be yellow. Okay, purple. My purple isn't very pigmented, so I went back and I grabbed more. Let's see, I'm gonna go down. So there's 4 colors, so I'm trying to go down about 1/4 of the way. Washing my brush out. Now I'm grabbing red. I'm gonna go right under the purple and a little bit in so that I'm getting rid of a line. And then I'm washing my brush out again. Do you guys know why? Because I picked up a little bit of the purple and I didn't want to drag it down with me. So I washed my brush out so I'm not carrying a dirty color with me. So there's my purple. I'm trying to eyeball 1/4, you guys. So I think that's about 1/4. Okay, washing my brush out, I'm grabbing orange. Remember, right next to, and then scoot it into the red. I'm trying to have there no line. So if you see that it's developing a line, you're gonna have to go over it a little bit. I think that's still a little bit liney. I'm gonna push it into each other. I have to say, I'm a little disappointed in the camera. It's not picking up the colors. I think the colors look better in person than they do on my camera. I don't know what they look like on your guys' end, but. Okay, I'm back. It looks okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now I'm grabbing my yellow, last color. So this is a gradation, you guys. This is also a wet into wet. So it's kind of like two birds with one stone. I'm trying to have you guys practice how to blend nicely into each other.
How are you?
Good.
Now, I'm at the bottom. If you see any mistakes that were made at the top, you can't go back and fix them now. You can go back and fix them after it's dried, but if it's still wet, you can't do that. Paints, you can pretty much fix any mistake either A, immediately upon noticing you made the mistake, or B, you have to let it dry and then come back to it later. So make sure you guys are not trying to go back and fix mistakes that were made further up. Just for fun, I'm putting salt in mine. Because I can. I really want you guys to practice salt between now and the tree, just because it's really fun. So if you guys have salt, I want you to try it. It's a really
Already
pretty... Oh, very good, Joey. It's a really good technique for, I use it a lot in rocks in particular, any kind of cool texture on the side of buildings. This needs to be completely dry though. So Joey, I see you're using the salt. It needs to be completely dry before you flick off the salt. And when you flick off the salt, try to make sure you put it in the garbage can, not all over the kitchen or wherever you guys are doing your art. Mom might not appreciate salt everywhere. So make sure it goes in the garbage can. All right. So for beginning, you guys, this was all I had for today. It's gonna be really easy because we're working up to our harder project's gonna be later because we're gonna be working on this. Can everyone see that? Now, here's a little snippet. Does this tree look familiar? Anyone who did something with me yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does.
This is exactly the same tree
Yes, it does.
as this. So here's your assignment.
It looks familiar.
If you did not do this tree earlier, if you didn't do this tree earlier, take a look at the video and try practicing drawing it first, because this is going to be the tree that we do in watercolor. So it's exactly the same tree. So I want you guys to take a look at the video, maybe practice it a few times, because we're going to have to hand draw this and then watercolor it. Okay, does that make sense, you guys?
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you want us to have the tree drawn before we start the class, or are you going to teach us how to draw it during the class?
I'm going to draw it during the class because I'm going to assume that not everybody has taken the class previously. So I'm going to draw it live.
Okay.
But if you want to have it drawn already, that's okay. It's just you have nothing to do for a little while. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit time to have freestyle painting if you have enough.
Yes, you could. Absolutely. Now there's one more piece of material that I need you guys to see if you can track down between now and later. And that's going to be a hair dryer. So if you guys have taken watercolor with me before, do you guys remember that I use a hair dryer a lot? Yeah. So I did this project without a hair dryer because I spent hours, I would go do some chore and then come back and paint it again. But in order for us to finish this in a timely manner, you're going to need a hair dryer. So see if your mom has a hair dryer that she'll let you borrow and keep it close by to where you're going to be painting. And then we're going to be using a hair dryer. Now I'll make sure we're going to have to mute each other because having hair dryer sound in the background is not going to be super pleasant. So make sure that you bring your hair dryer and that we're muting when we're blow drying, so we're not blasting everybody with the hair dryer sound. Last thing I want to say is that this tree that I painted was painted with Crayola paint. So if all you have is Crayola paint and you're not super excited because maybe you think it's not the best paint in the world, I'm not mad at it. It acts a little differently than the paint that I'm used to working with, but it did pretty well. So if all you have is Crayola, this is what I used. And I managed to make it work quite well. I will say about the Crayola versus the knockoff, remember I told you guys that there is a palette that looks like this. It's not Crayola. It doesn't have brown. So if you have the Crayola one, I like it better because it actually has the brown in it versus the other one that doesn't have brown. Okay, so we're done, you guys. Is there any questions about what we did now and any questions about later?
No.
No? Everyone's good?
Yeah. I wonder if John did this in virtual.
In digital?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Mr. John or Miss Gia, is there anything else you guys want to add before we sign off today?
I just want everyone to get their stuff ready for 2 o'clock because it's going to be super fun when we do our tree. And then I think we're going to try to do the same kind of watercolor project next Thursday. So if you didn't get all the materials you wanted, or you had a sibling or a friend who wanted to join in, tell them they need to grab their Crayola and their paper so they can come next Thursday too.
Okay. All right, guys. So we'll see you at 2:30, I think is what it is.
Bye.
Bye, guys. We'll see you at 2:30. Bye.
It's at 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. Not 2:30. 2.